my hometown and the home of the Williams Lake Stampede, the greatest show on dirt. Over the true caribou spirit, we'll get back up, dust ourselves off, saddle up, and ride again. Yeehaw!
James Assiniboia Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, beginning last Friday, Jewish Canadians across the country have been celebrating Sukkot. During this time, we celebrate the gathering of the harvest and commemorate 40 years of the ancient Israelites wandering the desert when they left Egypt. For 8 days, Jews will gather in a sukkah, which is a hut that represents the temporary shelters used on the way out of Egypt. It is here where meals and prayers are shared throughout Sukkot to celebrate this joyous and festive occasion. During this celebration, a bundle of different plants is waved in all different directions, known as the four kinds. These symbolize Jewish unity, demonstrating the different levels of knowledge and observance within the Jewish faith being united. Today, I wish the Jewish community across Canada celebrating Sukkot a Chag Sameach.
The list of laws broken by these Liberals and Liberal insiders gets longer by the day. News continues to break about more Liberals involved with organized crime, committing fraud, assault, and in this place, ethics laws. For years now, they have broken ethics laws, been caught, and then tried to cover it up. The WE scandal is no different. When multiple committees were dialing in on the corruption around the cabinet table, the Prime Minister shut down Parliament and locked the doors on those committees. In the middle of a pandemic, this Prime Minister put his cover-up before the needs of Canadians. Now that Parliament has resumed, it's clear their vote to block the WE documents at committee demonstrate that their intent on covering up their corruption. Canadians' confidence in public institutions continues to be degraded by this Liberal government. Canadians want truth, and they deserve answers. It's time for Liberal members to make a choice. Will they bring the truth to light, or will they be complicit in corruption and cover-ups that damage our democracy?
John Report.
That's not all. Repression of the Muslim Uyghur community continues. Chinese authorities are ramping up their assault on the freedoms of those living in Hong Kong. The new national security legislation is resulting in the arrest and detention of democracy rights activists. That is why Canada was the first country in the world to suspend its extradition treaty with Hong Kong. That is why we are taking a leadership role with our allies, Mr. Speaker. We remain firmly committed to the immediate release of the two arbitrarily detained Canadians, but that has not meant that we have not stood up to China, because Canada will always stand up for what is right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for 2 decades now, the government could count on the World Health Network to prevent pandemics. In 2018, the Liberal government changed its mission. It more trusted countries like China, and right now, Canada was not at all prepared for COVID. Why did the PM close our first line of defense? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Over the years, Canada has continued to play an important role, not only in Canada, but across the world, in the fight against infectious diseases. We've worked with our partners worldwide, and we're going to continue to do so. We have no lessons. Well, we also learned lessons from SARS in Toronto in 2003, and we learned from this and applied these lessons. In January, Dr. Tam had already called meetings with her counterparts in other provinces, and we're going to continue to work with experts here in Canada and abroad. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. That's not the case, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister counselled our pandemic system, and he relied on official information from the Chinese government rather than those of Canadian analysts. Canada had a pandemic alert system that was avant-garde, and this is no longer the case. Why does the Prime Minister value press releases from Beijing rather than those from Canada, the Right Honourable Prime Minister? That's simply not the case. We have extraordinary experts across Canada who give us recommendations, but we also do work in a multilateral system that recognizes the work done by our allies across the world, including at the WHO. We're going to continue to work on the best possible evidence while we protect Canadians. That's what we've done since the beginning of this pandemic, and that's what we're going to continue to do throughout it. Unlike other parties, we're going to be there to support Canadians at every stage and based on science. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Prioritized information from Beijing over Canadian intelligence officials. And experts have been warning since 2018 that the government was keeping them from reporting international health situations, leaving Canadians at risk. The last warning that went out without government interference was in May of 2019. 7 months later, doctors in Wuhan began raising alarms about a pandemic. Mr. Speaker, why did the Prime Minister shut down this country's first line of defense against COVID-19?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see the Conservatives playing up alarmist political points to score cheap political points. That's simply not the way it worked. We worked from the beginning of January where our public health officials engaged with their counterparts, Dr. Tam engaged with their counterparts across the country to highlight the concerns and the threat of this potential virus. We had intelligence briefings through the month of January on this issue, and we continued to work based on the best advice of our top scientists and medical officials in Canada, but also top scientists and officials from around the world, including at the WHO.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, alarmist. What's alarming is the news story in the paper today that said that senior Health Canada officials said that information about health outbreaks were being dumbed down by this government. Scientists have said the government placed a higher priority on open source information from China than on information gathered by Canadian intelligence officials. Before the pandemic warning system was shut down by this Prime Minister, it was leading the world in identifying outbreaks. Why did the Prime Minister put the health of Canadians at risk when he shut down the pandemic warning system?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I think all Canadians, and especially scientists across this country, will know that we will not take lessons from Conservatives when it comes to supporting science and scientists in this country. For 10 years under Stephen Harper, they slashed science budgets. They slashed and limited the abilities of scientists to do their work. So on the contrary, we invested historic amounts in supporting scientists across the country, in ensuring that science is at the forefront of decisions we take. We will continue to put forward the responsible and powerful decisions made by our science as the things that we move forward as a country on.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Senator Salma Atulajan is running to be the president of the International Parliamentary Union. Senator Atulajan would be the first Canadian. She would also be the first Muslim Canadian to be put forward by Canada for a prestigious position like this. Will the Prime Minister join me today in formally endorsing Senator Atulajan's candidacy for President of the IPU?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we will take no lessons from Conservatives when it comes to gender equality or diversity. We recognize Senator Salma Atulajan's important work on human rights issues. The Minister of Foreign Affairs had a great conversation with her about her candidacy last week.
I'm going to interrupt the Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'm having a hard time hearing. I mean, there's not a lot of people with COVID, and we're doing this by virtual as well. But the noise is starting to get up, and people are more than making up for the small numbers. Now that everything's quiet, I'll sit down and I'll let the Right Honourable Prime Minister continue.
Speaker, the Minister of Foreign Affairs had a great conversation with Senator Salma Atulajan last week about her candidacy, and we'll be speaking with her again. As it has long been the case, the government does not support candidates for roles in interparliamentary organizations like the IPU. That is for members in the House and Parliament of the world to decide, and we wish the Senator well in her campaign.
The Honourable Member for Balaye-Chambly. Thank you. Canada's relationship with its First Peoples is a nation-to-nation relationship that is the responsibility of the Prime Minister. He has to be concerned with the social issues that Indigenous peoples face, and that's where prejudice and racism comes into play. He spoke with the spouse of Ms. Joyce Echaquan and with the chiefs to tackle the social issues that are the direct heritage of the shameful Indian Act and systemic racism in Canada's history. The Right Honourable Prime Minister, I'd like to express my deepest condolences to the family of Joyce Echaquan and to all the family that experienced this loss. Across the country, we were shocked by the video, and I'd like to say that the Indigenous Legion I spoke with were shocked but not surprised. This is a lived reality for all too many Indigenous peoples across our country. They face racism, and that is why on this side of the House, we do recognize systemic racism, and we're going to continue to work with this community and with all communities to eliminate systemic racism. The Honourable Member for Balaye-Chambly. Obviously, we do as well, but it's not up to we're in the Parliament so that he needs to say this, but to Ms. Echaquan or to the chief. Does he realize that the Quebec government contacted the community, met with the chiefs, conducted a public investigation, and is also going to look at recommendations? Does the Prime Minister realize that his condolences do not meet up to the relationship that he should have with Indigenous peoples, but Quebec is doing so? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, first, I'd like to congratulate what I believe to have heard from the Bloq leader is that there is systemic racism in Quebec. It's important to be there to fight every day against systemic racism, and I'd like to underscore that the Minister of Foreign Affairs was at Joyce's funeral yesterday, and Minister Bennett also has communicated with the community and the family. We're going to continue to fight systemic racism and to move towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in this country. This country, the Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We're clearly in a second wave of COVID-19. People are worried. They're afraid for the future. And to give people confidence, can the Prime Minister commit today to guaranteeing that when a vaccine will be available, it will be free for everyone? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since the onset of this pandemic, as a government, we've done everything we can to support Canadians, to reassure them in this situation, which does cause a lot of concern. We were there to help provinces with their healthcare systems. We were there to help workers, families, and small businesses, and we're going to continue to do so. In terms of the vaccine, we've established an expert committee to provide recommendations on the best way to ensure to distribute this vaccine for free in the best possible way, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to be once again very clear on this question. People are worried, they're deeply concerned, and something that would help out Canadians right now is a clear commitment, because it was unclear yesterday, so I want to ask one more time very clearly. Once a vaccine is ready, will the Prime Minister commit clearly that that vaccine will be freely available to all Canadians? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we deeply cherish our universal health care system, and that means that things like life-saving vaccines are free for Canadians. We indeed put forward a committee of independent experts to help counsel the government on the best way to ensure that vaccines are distributed fairly, equitably, and in the right priority way so that Canadians can be as safe as possible as these vaccines are discovered. I can highlight, however, the extraordinary work of our procurement Minister, who has ensured that we have a great access to vaccines from around the world as they become available.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Parliamentary Budget Officer mentioned that the federal government's Innovation Superclusters program is unlikely to achieve its objectives. My mother often told me that a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. The aerospace industry in Canada is declining. There are thousands of jobs now that are at risk. How does the government explain that it is crushing this Quebec flagship in full flight? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we all recognize that this pandemic is hitting several sectors harder than others. For example, tourism, aerospace and travel, and also the oil industry. We are there to help workers across the country in all industries to get through this pandemic. We did it with the CERB, we did it with the wage subsidy, but we're going to continue to work with innovative companies in the aeronautic industry to move forward and to protect them. The member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Our aerospace industry continues to unravel, and it is also Canada's international credibility and influence that are affected. Aerospace in Canada is Magellan in Winnipeg, Pratt & Whitney in Longueuil, and also CAE present in Begleville. Aerospace provides jobs and economic development for the regions of Quebec, not just in Montreal. So why is the Liberal government focusing all of its efforts on the supercluster strategy that is in a state of disarray? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're investing across the country to help innovative industries that will prepare for the future and for the jobs of the future. And that's why we're investing so much in aerospace. And that's why we're investing so much in these superclusters, because we have trust in the future that Canadians are building and innovating every day. We're going to continue to be there to support workers in industries across the country like we've always done, and we're going to continue to do so.
For Calgary, Nose Hill.
When the Prime Minister shut down Canada's early warning system on the pandemic, and he says that he was briefed at the end of January, he was relying on WHO data that countries around the world admit was opaque and less than transparent, to be generous, from China. Then they fumbled around for weeks talking about how masks weren't effective and that there was no human transmission of this. We were flying blind. And now, going into Thanksgiving weekend, the Prime Minister is asking people to cancel their Thanksgiving dinners because of his failure. Very simply put, will the Prime Minister apologize to Canadians for this massive failure?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the Conservatives try to score cheap partisan points, we remain focused on Canadians. This is an unprecedented pandemic that hit hard on countries around the world, and we pulled together across orders of government, even mostly across party lines, to deliver for Canadians, both the health measures that would keep them protected, but also the economic supports, things like the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, things like the wage subsidy that made a huge difference in Canadians being able to be confident in their present and their future. We will continue to have Canadians' backs.
The member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
The inconvenient truth for this Prime Minister is that the fact is that it's only been since Parliament resumed after he shuttered it that Canadians have seen action on things like rapid tests. We still don't have answers on when they're actually going to get here, though. You know, that answer was so trite and it was so glib, because if he actually cared about Canadians, he would have access to rapid tests. He would be trying to fix things like shutting down the early warning system, and he would be doing the right thing and taking accountability for his lack of action and his failure to protect Canadians. Simple question. How many tests are Canadians going to get, rapid tests, and when?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, one point on which I vehemently disagree with the member for Nose Hill is that I believe that every single Canadian, every single parliamentarian in this place cares deeply about Canadians. No matter how much I disagree with the member from Calgary Nose Hill on a number of things, I know she cares about Canadians, and I think that she should expect that all of us care about Canadians deeply, because we have come together in this time of pandemic to deliver for Canadians. Health Canada has stepped up. Canadians have stepped up. The provinces have stepped up.
When veteran Sean Bruyere dared speak truth to power, pointing out how veterans would receive less in the Liberal so-called Pension for Life scheme, he was publicly attacked by the former Minister of Veterans Affairs, who wrote, "Individuals like Sean Bruyere are stating mistruths about Pension for Life to suit their own agenda." Bruyere sued the minister for defamation, seeking $25,000 in damages. The Liberals then used the full weight of the government to defend the minister against a veteran who, it turned out, was right, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. I'm asking for the Prime Minister to justify this to Canadians.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As the member well knows, an agreement was reached in that case, and as part of that agreement, we will not be commenting on it further. But I will highlight that service delivery and support to veterans and families has been a priority since the very beginning. Since 2016, we invested nearly $10.5 billion in new money for our veterans and their families. This funding was invested in new centres of excellence on chronic pain and post-traumatic stress disorder, increased financial compensation, and more, which stands in stark contrast to the Conservative approach, including from the now Leader of the Opposition, which was to close offices, fire staff, and gut Veterans Affairs.
Honourable Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Well, when it came to defending a case against a convicted terrorist, Omar Khadr, the Prime Minister had no problem rolling over and giving in to Khadr with a $10.5 million payday. But for those who served and defended this country like Bruyere, and let's add Admiral Mark Norman to this, after attacking their integrity and honor, the Prime Minister and his ministers spent millions in legal fees defending themselves. Since the Prime Minister couldn't kick Bruyere out of cabinet or caucus like he did to Jane, Selina, and the former AG, who all spoke truth to his power, will he at least apologize to Bruyere, and while he's at it, Admiral Norman, for the assault on their reputation?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see the extent to which Conservatives like to wrap themselves in the flag while they actually have a record of nickel and diming our veterans by cutting their services, by cutting opportunities for their families, by shuttering 9 Veterans Affairs offices right across the country at a time when veterans needed proper help. These are the things that we've worked on over the past numbers of years, investing $10.5 billion in our veterans when Conservatives did nothing for them for 10 long years.
The Honourable